Good morning, everybody, and thanks so much for joining us once again for Mondays with Mark. Just our usual housekeeping announcements before we get going. We do ask that you please remain on mute throughout the duration of the show, just to make it easier to hear our host and our guest without any feedback. If you do have questions or comments or anything that you want to put in the chat, there's a little chat bubble up there. You can click on that and type it in, which we will monitor and make sure we get to those as we go through. Or you can also use the raise hand emoji, the little smiley emoji with the hand up, and you can click on that and we can unmute you and you can ask your question verbally as well. And before we get into it today, just one further announcement. There are a whole bunch of links. Our guest this week has a wealth of information. There's a whole bunch of links. It's too much to post in the chat, all of them right now. But if you'd like access to any of them, if you drop a line to our office inbox, and I'll put that in the chat, it's Rhode Island _DO at SBA.gov. We'll be happy to get those out to you after the fact as well. But without any further ado, I want to turn over to our host, our district director here in Rhode Island, Mark Hayward.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Matthew. Again, it was a great week last week. I just want to kind of recap what we did. We had the Associate Administrator for International Trade in town. Had a great conference at the Crown Plaza. Both Senator Reid and Senator Whitehouse spoke at the conference. We did a little trip around Rhode Island where we took the Associate Administrator and the Regional Administrator and both senators to Takeout Comfort Solutions. And I got actually to see some of the new things that because they merged, not merged, but they bought an Italian and a Swiss company, which really rounds out what they're doing. And then we went down to Walco Electric, and it was a great, absolutely great tour of Walco Electric. It's amazing what they do at Walco and the number of international trade agreements that they have. And then we took the Associate Administrator up to Bryant University to have a discussion about international trade and our STEP grant. In addition, on Thursday, we went over to Block Island, and that was very successful. And our guest today, Don, I'll tell you what, there's a lot of information. I know that you can impart. This is Don Epifano, who actually I see a lot in the hallway or in the elevator or while he is here in Providence. And Don's responsibility is not only Rhode Island, but also Connecticut. And so you're actually sitting in Connecticut right now. You are the director of the Wage and Hour Division of both Connecticut and Rhode Island. You have a law degree from Roger Williams University, and I think that's absolutely great. And on occasion, we get a lot of questions, and I think the one thing that this Monday with Mark can help is to just provide some clarity to a lot of people as to what does the Wage and Hour Division do and how can you help? And what are some of the, because I know we've seen some actions against particularly restaurants, Don, and if you can talk about that as well. But welcome to Mondays with Mark. This is always a fun time. It's more of a conversation between you and I. And again, as Matt said, if anybody wants to ask a question, please jump in, put it in the chat or let us know. So welcome. And why don't you just give us a little bit about your background and what Wage and Hour actually does?
So much. Thank you. Thanks for having me too. Wage and Hour in the Hartford district office, they enforce the law across two states, both Connecticut and Rhode Island. So Wage and Hour is tasked with enforcing about 10 laws, but most predominantly is the Fair Labor Standard Act, which is minimum wage, record keeping, child labor, and overtime, and also Family Medical Leave Act that provides unpaid job protection for qualifying events. So we enforce these laws across two states with a really talented staff that includes about 10 investigators that do the on-the-ground enforcement. And then we have a community outreach specialist position, that's Heather Callahan. And we have two supervisors in addition to myself, and then 3 support staff. So we work with the community in kind of two ways. We do both the outreach and education to employers and employees, and then the enforcement side of the job, which is more so to the investigators role, where we find violations and then bring businesses into compliance and then figure out remedies for the workers that were harmed.
So let's start on the first side, not the punitive side, but so I'm somebody who wants to start a small business. What should I know about Wage and Hour Division, and what should I be looking out for to make sure that I'm complying with? Because let's be very candid, there are so many laws across not only federal laws, but state laws and local laws, and everybody, just kind of piles on. And when people come to us and say, hey, listen, can you help me with a business plan? This is not the most prevalent that people are looking at. So what would you say to a business person or somebody who's just starting a business, what they should know?
Sure, I could see like that process being really overwhelming with the amount of regulation. But the DOL provides like new and small businesses resources online that are tailored specifically for new and small businesses, right? And there's a website that you could go to, and what you'll be able to do is it's kind of like a one-stop shop for like understanding the law, and then the requirements of the law, which include like paying overtime for hours over 40 in a week, paying the minimum wage, how you give duties to minors and how many hours that they're working under child labor, but also just simple things like posters, right? You could print out posters on the website to get started. One thing I'm really proud of that Wage and Hour does is we answer the phone, and we'll respond to any questions that like small businesses might have, right? So like the website's a great starting point, but like we're here to like answer any questions you may have about like the specific facts of your business and how to blend that with the law. We have like just about like a 90% answer rate to calls and coming to our offices, and the technicians provide a great service to the public and like any questions, and even if we don't know the answer like right away, we could always just give you a call and follow up with them.
The funny thing is, when we went to Block Island, had the opportunity to we work very closely with Interstate Navigation, and which is the Block Island ferry that goes back and forth, and just had a general discussion with their director at Point Judith, and she's saying, hey, we can't get employees. She says it's nearly impossible to get employees. She says, and when we do get employees, she says, what we're doing is we're getting the younger individuals. So my question to you is how old do you have to be in order to be gainfully employed? And then I'm going to follow up with a couple of statements that she made, because it really is problematic for particularly small businesses right now.
Yeah, we hear that a lot, like out in the field from employers, like the challenges of the labor market currently. And like even driving down the road, you see signs like, hiring, summer jobs, even at like large franchises, it seems like the age requirement, or at least that they're looking to employ might be lowering. But under the Fair Labor Standard Act, it generally accepted is like 14 and 15-year-olds is the starting age for work. And so each age group classification has like different requirements. So 14 and 15-year-olds work under different requirements under the law than 16 and 17-year-olds. And then once you reach 18, obviously you're not a minor anymore, and like the standard FLSA rules apply.
What's the prohibitions, Don, on the 14, 15s? What both on hours as well as the complexity of the job?
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to list like all the jobs that they can't do.
Just generally.
Right. So like they could do like basic retail cashier jobs, grocery store jobs. Like these are the typical jobs that you see like the employment for 14, 15-year-old minors. But there's also like hours requirements for them at 14 and 15-year-olds, where there isn't for 16-year-olds. So outside of the school year, I think we'll talk about that, because let's say, school's out for the summer in most locations, they can work 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. and nothing over 40 hours a week and nothing over 8 hours in a day. There's good bulletins that exist online that kind of have like a shorthand like matrix or reference to these that businesses to reference for like the different age groups of employees.
Yeah, that's great. And she was saying that she can bring them in, but again, when you're just entering the workforce, their problem, and it's not only their problem, it's kind of generally across the fruited plain here, that if you're going to put somebody as being the face to the public, you need somebody behind them who's a supervisor who can be with them at most times. You don't want to put a 14-year-old as your clerk or ticket agent, and not have somebody who's older? Are there requirements where businesses have to have people who have X experience or be older to be assisting those who are the 14 and 15-year-olds? And then I want to transition into the 16 and above.
Sure. Generally, I think the answer is probably no. There are some exceptions to this. Like there's work study programs that exist in the trades, right? That allow, if you're going to a trade school, you can receive supervision and you could do some of the jobs of the trade that are normally outlawed for minors. But I would say to your answer, generally the duties of the minors are restricted in such a way that it doesn't require such like sharp oversight.
Yeah, and the interest. So let me go a little step further. Can a 14 and 15-year-old be a deckhand on one of those boats?
To be honest, I think for 14 and 15-year-olds, the answer would be no, because for 14 and 15-year-olds, they can only do jobs that are identified for them. Once you reach like 16, 17-year-olds, there's only jobs that are prohibited. I don't think it would fall into the jobs that are permissible, but I'd probably have to follow up a bit more about specifically like what they're doing.
Yeah, and I'm because I keep going. Rhode Island is a tourism state, and and we talk about this all the time. We need. I probably hear in the rest of the staff, Joan and Matt and Lana and Katie and everybody else, hear more from small businesses that are looking for employees. Restaurants are a huge part of that. So, having said that, I mean, can a 14-year-old operate a dishwasher?
Yeah, they could be like in the front of the house doing that sort of work. In the back of the house, it gets extremely limited into like what they're able to do and to touch in the back of the house.
Yeah, and I think that's the complicated side of it because, I don't. They can't be servers. We know that they can't serve alcohol because of the restrictions on age. But and the reason why I say this, Don, is we are constantly getting people from across Rhode Island saying, "I need people."
Right.
And I'm always out there, Don, saying to both people in the schools as well as trade schools, saying, listen, if young people want to work and make money, they have a great opportunity because there is a whole bunch of people who are hiring. But then the limitations come down where they have a problem as to what they can actually do.
Yeah, it's really burdensome to employ minors like in these capacities where you're not like strictly tailoring the job and duties that they're doing. Like if you work in an environment where like they may be allowed that they do some things but not others, it would take a lot of oversight. Like if somebody is in a business and they have any questions about what the minors could do, like they could certainly call the office, but the actual implementation of it, I agree with you. It is really restrictive.
What's that narrow path that people have? Because I know that because I've seen a number of the decisions that have come out from Wage and Hour, mostly as it relates to hospitality industries on both pay as well as working conditions and hours. What would be your recommendation to the hospitality industry in general about? And I want to get back to the trades at some point in time, so remind me. But hospitality in general, about what they should be looking for and to avoid those kind of instances where they would be subject to investigation.
Yeah, well, I could talk about like a lot of the violation cases that we see, but we also do a lot of outreach, especially with the Rhode Island Hospitality Association. We like, especially pre-COVID, we'd attend a lot of their events and promote like a lot of material through them, and also we field a lot of questions from the members. But I think generally, like we see the same violations over and over in the restaurant industry. Like the FLSA has been around since 1938, so it's kind of like the repeat of the same things. Like back of the house, people being paid a salary of say like $500, $750 per week with no overtime, right? They just get their flat salary. So that's something standard that we see within restaurants. Also, servers, if they're paid on a tip basis, right? That's $3.89 in Rhode Island. If they're working overtime, sometimes restaurants calculate their time and a half on that tipped rate with $3.89. when it should be a different calculation based on the full state minimum wage.
So what should the calculation be done on that? Because I know that that's a question that we get all the time.
Yeah, so if it's a bit complicated, and sometimes even the payroll companies, like if a business isn't specific about how it should be done, like the payroll company will sometimes let you put it in wrong too. So you take the state minimum wage, like say, let's say it's $12 for an easy round number, and you pay time and a half based on the $12. So $18 would be the overtime rate, but then you subtract out the difference between the $3.89 and the $12, and then you subtract that out from the overtime rate. So you get the benefit of the tip credit for all hours, but you're not paying time and a half based on the $3.89, if that makes sense for everyone.
Yeah, and you know, the other thing is we talk about tip hours, and this has always been we've worked very closely with Dale Venturini
Yeah.
and with Sarah Brocto, who is the executive vice president, her legal counsel as well. I mean, and the one thing that we keep hearing, I keep hearing in my ear, if you're going to tip, make sure that you put, and you're going to use a credit card, make sure you put it on the credit card, because that is a way for small businesses to stay in compliance, because you know, the unreporting of tips creates, and I don't work for the IRS, so but there are a whole bunch of other factors, including your factors, as it relates to recording tips and how people are paid. Is that not correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So like the server paid $3.89 needs to make up the difference to the state minimum wage or federal minimum wage, the difference, right? So that difference is made up in tips, and part of most servers make it up easily on a per hour basis, but there could be some weeks due to seasonality or whatever where it's not made up, and it's the employer's responsibility in those situations to make up the difference.
So how does it come to your attention that there may be a discrepancy, and what happens from that point on?
Sure. Our cases usually get started two ways, if that's like what you're asking about. We receive complaints from the public, and that could be from anyone. Maybe it's an employee, maybe it's another employer, or maybe it's somebody that just noticed something like in the workplace. And then we'll assign the case to an investigator to look into like whatever the allegations are. And usually that starts with the investigator going to the establishment and requesting records and doing employee interviews. And based on the records and the interviews, like if they align and we find that the business is in compliance, that's great. We provide some publications and move on. If we find out like, the business may be doing something wrong, maybe inadvertently, we just correct like whatever that action is going forward. But then we also have like kind of a look back period of 2 to 3 years where we correct the violation for that period for the workers and then request that the employer pay the back wages.
Have you ever come into a situation where the actual employer would come and say, hey, listen, I'm not sure where we are at this point in time, without the, when people hear investigation, I mean,
Yeah.
that has an entirely different connotation with saying, other than providing general assistance. Has anybody actually ever come to you and said, hey, listen, we want to make sure we're doing this right. Can you all come in and just make sure that we're on target and we're doing what we're supposed to be doing?
Kind of like a blended version of this, right? We're kind of limited in that capacity. Like if we're doing an investigation, it's investigation, and if we find back wages due, we have to assess it, right? But an employer could just call and ask for general advice, and they don't have to say like, your name or the identity of your business in any way. And you could just get anonymous compliance advice on how to proceed. The benefit of employers doing this outright upfront is that we typically look back in a 2-year period. So like, let's say someone calls in June, right? Brings the payroll practice into compliance. By the end of the year, you have 6 months that kind of fell off in terms of any back wages that might be due to the employee. Certainly, like the employer could fix it looking backwards, but if you were to be investigated in the future, certainly coming into compliance as soon as possible would be a benefit.
Don, what's the one piece of advice that you would give, in particular, hospitality and small retailers?
Uh, that's a good question, because the law's pretty vast, like in this area. But I would say that the majority of the violations we see in terms of dollar amounts stem from overtime. So it's making sure that you're having people working 40 hours or under, if you're in a position where you say like, oh, we can't pay overtime or we don't pay overtime. You know, an employer could take this type of position, but you know, the employees just can't work overtime in that scenario. So I think it's having a keen eye on what happens in that like 40th hour of work for a small business, because that's a really crucial moment within like the law. And it goes from like what's just due, what might be just minimum wage, to a potential overtime. And the overtime cases are always like the much larger back wages.
So if you had a situation where somebody came to you, you did an investigation, you found that the employees were owed X dollars, and I've seen some of the decisions have been pretty hefty, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so are those decisions the well, let's go this way first. Those decisions are addressing the difference between what they should have got and what they should be paid, and that's they have to remunerate back to the employees plus penalties and fines. Is that how that works?
That's a really good question. So the law allows us a lot of flexibility in this area. Typically, when we do a case, and we find back wages due, an equal amount of liquidated damages could also be assessed for that back wage violation. So let's say we find the employee due $100. If liquidated damages are assessed in this case, right, instead of going to litigation, it could be $200 due to the employee. And the wage hour could also assess fines or penalties, but we usually only do so in kind of two cases. One, where we found out the employee was doing something willfully, and two, if it's like a repeat violation where like we investigated you, we didn't assess a penalty, or we did, and then we came back again and we found the same exact violation.
So who pays the employees? Through you do through the back wages, you do through the assessment of that fine?
We strive for the fines themselves go to the government, but the back wage amounts go to the employees. And we usually work with the employer on how the money should be dispersed. Like if a lot of the employees are like current employees and it's not a terribly big sum of money, we usually have the employer like just pay and provide us proof of that payment.
And I know we have a hand up, and I'm going to go to the hand in a second. So, and this is mostly, would you say, hospitality and related retail, small retail, mostly?
Like in terms of like what industries we tend to do most of our work in?
Yeah.
I would say like it's probably like that's probably the largest, due to like it just being like that's the economy of Rhode Island and Connecticut mostly. But we're like within, like we have jurisdiction over like every industry. We do a lot of work in the trades too, and like construction.
Okay. And Mr. Jones, I'm going to come to you in 1 second. And by the way, Don, we only have 6 minutes left. That's why I told you this goes this really goes quick. So, Mr. Jones, why don't you can unmute yourself and ask the question. Lawrence Jones, you have your hand up. Matt, is that something you can do or no?
I cannot know.
Okay.
Hello. Yes.
Yes,
Got it.
Mr.
Can you hear
Jones.
me?
Yes.
Yes. Sorry about that. I was hitting the wrong button. Yes. I was wondering if you're hiring, people, and you mentioned about a tip hour. Can you go a little bit more detail about that?
Sure. So some industries, like, tips are commonplace. A tipped employee is someone that served, like, kind of generally is somebody that serves the public in a position that like historically receives tips. So they're getting the tip payment is coming from the customer as opposed to the employer, and they regularly reoccurring receive this money. It's not like a one-off. So mostly it's in like mostly you see it in service-based like economy restaurants, hotels.
Okay. And another question in reference to hiring minors is there a starting point? Like the gentleman said, 14 years old.
Yeah,
It
that's
starts at
correct.
14. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that's the generally accepted like age in which like minors could do some jobs. There are some exceptions for 13-year-olds, like newspaper delivery is one of them, and working in films. But for like most common jobs, would be 14 years old.
A long time ago, very far away, Don, when I was just a child, 100 years ago. There was, I remember that my parents used to have to sign working papers. Is that still in effect, or is that,
Yes,
were
I
you?
remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I believe a state requirement. So
Okay.
most minors might have like their age verification forms filled out by like their school. Usually like the school departments have something for that, or maybe like in the city that they live in.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jones. Appreciate those comments. Yeah, I wanted to go back, and by the way, we only have 3 minutes left in this whole, I told you it goes fast. I want to talk to the trade side of this, because the trades seem to be a bigger issue. And I know that there are a lot of people out there who are in dire need of trades. When we were on Block Island, one of the things that was said to us, can you have somebody, and we're going to work with John Marco Antonio, and I'm sure you're familiar with John, who's the head of the Rhode Island Builders Association, because they need to encourage young people to look at the potential trades. And so is that differentiated, Don, in any way from we're talking about the hospitality side? Because I mean, it's an entirely different perspective.
Yeah, the FLSA kind of prohibits minors working in trades generally, right? Because usually they're working with like hazardous orders under the law, but there are exceptions, and like one of the exceptions is like being part of a, like a schooling course, career where you're in a course of study, but you also then go to like a job site or training site and get to use like the equipment under supervision. So like the FLSA does like contemplate this thing you're saying that allows for like minors to be working in the trades in some capacity, but it's usually in conjunction with some type of schooling, not just like general summer employment.
Yeah, and FSLA is Fair Labor Standards Act, in case anybody was concerned about that. That you, at the beginning of this program, you mentioned that you do outreach to the community. I mean, is there in some way that we can work together to try to get this message out? Because I know that a lot of new businesses are having those issues. What do I do? And who would we work with, Don?
Yeah, you certainly could contact myself or Heather Callahan, who's also on today's call. She's our community outreach specialist, and
Yep.
and we did about 90 outreaches in the last year. That's outreach events, right? So we're pretty booked in terms of like what we do, which is a great thing. So we'll be able to come to. We look for
Great.
trade associations or any type of stakeholder where we can reach the general public.
Well, believe it or not, we're at the end of the road. It is 11:29. I want to make sure that you have an opportunity for a recap. And yes, Heather, by the way, has been really great. I've been watching what she's been posting in the chat, and certainly we will make sure that. And she just posted her email address. Thank you, Heather. Appreciate that. And we will make sure that we get that out. If there is any, what would you tell everybody who's listening today as to what you would recommend that they do as a concerned wage an hour, and what's the best advice you give?
Sure. Like if you heard something today, like, and you're thinking about maybe your own small business and you think, oh, well, maybe this might not be in line with compliance, to just call our office, and you don't have to state the name of your business or anything, and maybe follow up for just a bit more information, and we'll get you on the right path.
Thank you, everyone. It was great to have Don Epifano here from the Department of Labor, Wage and Hour Division. And I will tell you that we hope that everybody has a great 4th of July. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Bye now.
So much fun.